Hello and welcome to the Wolf Den podcast. I am your host Naco, joined by my co-host Sanitsu. This week, we're going to open with a small beginning segment, at least. Something I want to highlight as someone who is a fan of well thought out, uh, creative thought that gets put into this card game and its systems. And I know we're still coming off the heels of the Digifests, which had the sideboards and mulligans present, and we now know that the Ultimate Cups will include a mulligan but no side decks, and basically the fallout of that. Um, I guess before I just start reading and talking at you guys, though, uh, Zenitsu, what are your thoughts on this announcement?
So it didn't necessarily come as a big super shock to me. I thought they probably would have just tried to test sideboards in a more online environment instead of a physical environment, because that's what most of the Digifests were. The only Digifest that I think wasn't was Canada's, and Canada's was a best of one, which was a weird thing, but that's a completely different story. And I thought they would have basically used this whole entire format to test to see the health and fluidity of a sideboard. And I guess with some player feedback, they are deciding to just say, okay, we have some good initial data for sideboards and mulligans. Now let's see what happens with just sideboards, or with sideboards being gone and just the mulligans. And I think those different types of environments allow different decks to thrive based on just what pool of cards they have access to and the deck building restrictions in place because of it.
That's an interesting point. I didn't exactly, I wasn't exactly at least framing it as they want to test mulligans only and not them together, which they still technically could be doing. At least, from my opinion, I feel like at least for now, for probably the foreseeable future, even potentially, um, I guess this competitive season really, because this is nothing now we're doing matters in the scheme of nationals or next worlds. It's almost like the off season, so to speak, competitively, and this is where they're going to make any changes they want to make and then have to stick with that, potentially moving forward through the next set of nationals qualifiers and nationals, etc. But that is a good point that this could technically just be okay, we now know what it looks like with both side decks and mulligans. What is the response and what does the situation look like with just mulligans?
Yeah, and the thing that we saw obviously was the great polarization of blue hybrids. And there's a very particular reason why blue hybrids started overperforming, that part of it had to deal with sideboards and mulligans. Not necessarily so much mulligans. I think mulligans have a very minimal impact, but still make non-games into games. I really like this current state of mulligans. It's more of out of the sideboard. It's like looking at blue, if you really think about it, they just have better sideboard tools than most of the other colors. They actually can sideboard against most of their other bad matchups, where if you're playing, let's just say, Machine Dramon, there's no possible way for you to actually sideboard for your worst matchup, which is blue. So, in a scenario like that, they just have all the answers for blue, and you, as a black player, have no answers for anything.
I know I've seen a couple times people actually posting on Reddit and other social medias how do I beat uh, blue hybrid as Machine Dramon? And if there was any actual inherent hard counter in the game, that would be it. Like a deck whose sole purpose is to overcome all these leaps and bounds to shove a bunch of inheritables to make one really strong stack that then is immediately countered by the deck that strips away those inheritables.
I mean, you could kind of say there's a pro and con to it, where it's like Machine Dramon, you're just going to try to split the sources anyway, where you just try to digivolve into a Chaos Dramon, then use something like Kaisernail to split and gain value. But even that type of strategy against blue is just bad, because blue already has counters in place to be able to stop your machine Dramon from gaining full value and stop it from keeping its full value. Because, like, ideally, the reason why you're doing that is because you're going to be gaining resources off of splitting the machine Dramon, and, well, blue has various different floodgates to stop you from gaining lots of resources.
Yeah. Um, so I guess getting in specifically, so this is a post actually from earlier today, um, and it's a fairly well put post by a Reddit user on like why this person's mind was changed on whether they believe side decks and mulligans are a good idea. Um, they stated initially, having played other card games in the past and then hearing that side decks and mulligans were getting tried, they loved the idea of a side deck and hated the idea of a mulligan. Basically, coming from their experience playing other card games and how those uh, pieces were used in those card games, but basically have completely reversed their opinion after playing. And it's more, I guess, the wording and the specific details. Because honestly, I'm still pro mulligan and pro sideboard, but I also I'm at least like reticent as far as to like the inclusion of a sideboard permanently because it'd be very easy for Bandai to screw it up and to just print some cards that just completely are like auto include sideboard hate cards, like more extreme versions of the current floodgates. Um, so this is going to be me talking a bunch, but I feel like this really needs to get put out there on like a slightly larger forum besides like this just random person on Reddit. I don't know how many people actually like read the Reddit daily as I do. So
Yeah, I read that post and I thought even though there was a couple of like I could tell the person was typing fast. So there's like some very small typos and whatnot. Like the post as a whole in terms of like getting their thoughts down and trying to be cohesive, I thought it was a very good post. And like it is very easy for Bandai to screw up sideboards just because the game is designed in Japan and it's designed for Japan. We're just adopting it in various different ways, and the cards don't necessarily translate the best to all of the different ways that we're trying to play the deck, or the card, or just the format in general. Plus, all of our rules changes and various other things all culminate to something like they can't necessarily predict, or they didn't predict when that card was initially made.
one small last thing to note too is that because I mentioned this to Zenitsu when we were discussing before we actually started recording, was that these are the kinds of posts that like really show some longevity to the Digimon TCG to me at least because this is someone who A has a bunch of card game experience, B is passionate enough to write out this mini little essay on why they think Mulligan's side decks are a good thing or a bad thing, and but it's also really in depth, and the idea that like these kinds of people are being attracted and staying and playing the Digimon card game and then care enough to write said mini essay really shows that like there's some longevity here. That like people aren't this isn't a fad to these people necessarily, and it's really the game systems in place. Like I know I've stated it before casually at least to people, but like you could strip away like the actual characters of the Digimon card game, and I would still play it. If you just completely made this about I don't know like Neopets or some crap like that, like I would still play it due to like the mechanical nature of the card game, not necessarily like I was originally attracted to it due to like the remembering the show when I grew from growing up, but having played other like card games competitively and now playing this one, semi-competitively, it's really like the mechanics of the game, like the inherent nature of the memory system that's keeping me here.
Yeah, and just to continue on that little side tangent, the game did get made from Chrono Clash. So if you have not checked out Chrono Clash, you could check out Bandai's. I don't want to say it's dead. They just basically stopped making it. Chrono Clash was a living card game, and the whole idea was it was basically the foundation for what Digimon was, just using some really weird like design choices. So it instead of card text, it had hieroglyphics that you then had to decipher into basically card text. And its core framework was what Digimon currently is, and I'm totally okay with that dying in order for Digimon to succeed. But I'm super excited to like just see Digimon do so well and people get so passionate about it.
Yeah, I've literally never heard of that, but I'll at least look into it. So I feel like we're teasing everyone. Like, we'll at least include a link to this in the description if you guys want to read it yourselves and go over it and maybe yell at people in the comments. I don't know. There's already a lot of people doing that. Um, so like I said before, this person originally thought side deck's good, mulligan's bad, based on their initial understandings of those mechanics from other card games. And having played in the DigiFest, he said this person's played. They played in 3 DigiFests specifically. Um, that now side decks are bad, mulligans are good. And the reasoning is, let me start. I'm just going to start reading because I feel like me interpreting their words like kind of diminishes the value of the person's post. So let me start by saying I was wrong. I was wrong because I haven't actually played the game that competitively. My lack of experience led me to the wrong predictions. Let me give my very unbiased opinion on these two circumstances to think that I can give objective insight because I thought and wanted it to be the exact other way around. Uh, Point number one, Digimon's a very special TCG. Unlike other card games I've played, Digimon has insane draw power. You often go through half your deck at a minimum, and some decks can easily deck themselves, especially against yellow hybrids. This means that you will definitely see your sideboard cards, and that's the problem. However, I don't think that this is a terrible problem. I don't think that having a good sideboard card in every game is that bad. Similar things happen in some Magic formats, and they are still good. However, this isn't the only problem. The real problem comes with the fact that some decks cannot side deck. Digimon is incredibly archetype driven. Thus, only some decks can side deck properly. As a Machinedramon player, ouch, couldn't benefit from a side deck at all. Sure, I can bring a few other level 5s, but my engine requires my entire deck, and I can't throw random floodgates into them. However, Blue Hybrid can even play hate pieces in their main board and has 10 additional spots for hate cards as the engine doesn't require the whole deck to be built around it. It benefits from those side decking pieces. Therefore, you have 10 flex spots already in a Blue Hybrid deck. So, I guess stop there. Like, something I definitely, after reading this and kind of really keyed me into like read the whole thing and then now discuss it here, that's something that is fairly relevant is that Digimon does have insane draw power. And you do, like, the sideboard cards, especially when included in a high enough count, if you're going to throw in 4 copies of something, you will see it. That's like almost the rule of deck building as far as I'm concerned is 4 copies of the card you will see at least one of, and even at 3 copies of a card you'll probably see one of in a game.
Right, and going into like delving a little bit deeper into that, like every time we digivolve, we draw. So like he is kind of correct on the fact that like you don't even realize that just starting off with your security, then 5 cards, you're already 10 cards deep into your 50 card deck. Then the second you start actually playing your cards a single turn, you could go through easily 5, another 10, and then next thing you know, by the mid to late stages of the game, you're already halfway through your deck. And by that point, you should mathematically see those sideboard pieces, and those sideboard pieces are going to matter. And especially like he was saying, Digimon's a more it's seeming to lean more towards an archetype based gameplay style, even though obviously that's not necessarily true. There's plenty of archetypes that don't really have the archetypiness of it. But regardless, you build your deck in a very specific way, and you don't want to deviate from that very much, and you have a little bit of flexibility in how the deck actually could be edited, adapted, and like changed up for the given meta. Machinedramon, as his example, you're just what swapping in your level 5s, and that's kind of it. Like the core idea of the deck is staying the same no matter what. Blue hybrids, even though the core idea of the deck is staying the same, it has that room and space for flexibility to counter other things just because of the type of cards you're already going to be playing.
I think it also speaks to it's something that I've considered when discussing blue hybrid, especially in the context of sideboards and mulligans, is that like this person said, they already start out running like almost a full playset of both floodgates that Blue already has inherent access to. And then the additional, basically, if you're already not running 4 and 4 copies of um, Madoki Betamon and Psychumon, I don't know, weird
Yeah,
names,
come on.
Sayakamon, then you could just sideboard the the rest. If you're running 3 and 3, 4 and 4, like you could literally just run a full playset between your main sideboard. But the fact that a deck like Blue Hybrids isn't punished almost at all for main boarding a like all these crazy floodboards or floodgates, because I I was actually playing Machine Dramon in EX1 when the DigiFest was announced and when my locals switched over to mulligans and sideboards, like just for every regular local. Um, and I included uh, Chumans in my sideboard, but I basically found kind of what this person has found is that like, wow, I'm just actively hurting myself. Cool, I have a floodgate card now to potentially counter something, but all I did was slow myself down, slow my engine down. My engine is actively hurt by this, whereas the opponent's is not.
And like another point is like not all colors can sideboard equally just because the tools are made unequally. As harping on blue, the fact that they have Syakuman and Madoki Betamon, two floodgates that are currently very, very playable, and none of the other colors have both of them, and you have to work extra hard to get both of them into your deck, is already speaking volumes. Then on top of that, if you actually like stop and look at Blue's tech and tools and what people were sideboarding in from events, from like their sideboards that were posted on Twitter, like they have a very wide range of cards that they can use to counter specific decks, where other decks don't necessarily have those cards to be able to counter in the same capacity. So, like blue hybrids, you have EX1 Mirage, or not Mirage, Metal Garurumon to counter Cherubimon. There's nothing Cherubimon can do to side against that because of how Cherubimon works and functions. Like, you are just playing on delete ability based cards, and Metal Gurumon hates on that.
Hmm.
You can't side Cherubimon out because
Yeah.
that's the core of the deck. That's the whole idea. And like that's kind of the part of the problem on like why sideboards could be problematic is like just because of the way we sideboard, it benefits certain decks over others.
Yeah, I don't necessarily like to operate in the space of like um, card designer hat or whatever because I feel like a lot of people do it poorly. But I think something that would be fairly easy for Bandai to do at least is if so they've already like kind of renixed on the sideboard idea, but in the future, if they're at least still considering the possibility, just printing like like Magic does pretty much almost exclusively is complete cycles of cards. Like give every color a specific floodgate if you're going to print. If you're not if you're going to give every flood or every color a floodgate eventually, as it seems as though they're slowly doing kind of, because originally there was the I think the 3 and 3. Some colors could reduce costs, some colors could prevent memory gain, and that was just like almost like a color theory kind of thing. But now blue has both. So, well, you screwed that pooch. So now you just have to give everyone everything, at least at the moment. And we're even seeing like real far-reaching. Um, so, Psychomon comes out in BT8. Players cannot reduce play costs. Literally announced, I don't know, maybe an hour ago or two. Starter deck Jesmon also adds that ability to red. So like if you're going to include these identical abilities on functionally or mechanically identical cards in different colors, just print them all at the same time, please. Honestly.
I mean, the Jesmon and or the Ragnar Lordmon deck's also getting one. Like the new Chikurimon does the same
Oh, the
thing.
black.
So I don't like, but yeah, I do understand and get what you're getting at, where it's just like if you're already making them for multiple colors, just make it for all of the colors for
At
Pete's
the
sake.
same
Like, is
time.
it that hard? It doesn't necessarily have to be at the same time, but like
I
at the same
mean,
time would obviously be ideal. It's just like here is a floodgate for this cycle.
I'm saying at
Can't
the
reduce
same time only
boycott.
because like because then we end up in situations where like right now blue has access to both. Like I'm not looking that far forward. Does any other colors get a floodgate next set? I don't think there are any floodgates next set, are they? Am I
There's
immediately getting
Psychomon, and
well
then
Psychomon? This starts a
after
new
that would be
cycle.
Pillowmon.
Starts a new
Yeah,
but
and then I think Pillowmon in
oh
BT9 is another new cycle.
Kokowamon is in BT8. The black players cannot ignore Digivolution requirements. I think that's another
Yeah.
new cycle too, isn't it?
That's the only one as far as I know. Because I know Pillowmon, it's like Pillowmon and one other do the same thing in BT9.
1 second. This is me literally Googling on the fly. Yeah, it's literally the only one of its kind. So that may not be a
Yeah.
cycle. Who knows? But it could be. At any moment, they could just turn around and make it a cycle. Um, yeah, just the idea that like if you're going to give a single color the ability to do basically both of the floodgatey things, and in a deck that also uh like gets to run. It's one of the few hybrid decks that gets to run on color rookies because of how strong the color already has, because it already has um, searchers slash hybrids at the rookie level. Other colors don't have that. There's really a lot going well for blue hybrid right now. Um, but I guess moving like through just the idea that like it just if the idea that Bandai balancing a side deck to this extent, like we're already discussing how like how spread out the floodgates are and how other colors don't have the easily flexibility in their engines and their archetypes. Like I guess it kind of turns me off side decks. Like I still think there is a world where Bandai does it correctly, and that's a world I wish we lived in. But I guess it's also not the world we live in.
Yeah, I think like personally, it's just a little bit too early. Like the game is still in a very, I don't want to say infantile state. It definitely has matured quite a lot over the past year, but it's still in a very growing phase where it's just trying to still figure itself out, figure out what it can do, its own limitations of the cards that they want to make, and kind of just stick to that. And like it's just too early for side decks to be introduced because the card pool isn't fleshed out. The colors are not really fleshed out either in a solid extent. Like I think they know a general idea on what colors do, but then they make something like Jespon where it has access to every single keyword, and then it's just like, so do they know what colors they're doing? Um, it,
Yeah.
it it really draws up lots of questions where it just leads me to think that it's just too early. The card pool's not there to support it. And like we could kind of see that with like the inequality in like just the floodgates where it's like where they're going into what colors. Just that kind of shows just I don't necessarily know they are anticipating or thinking about this as deeply as we are. Just because we do know it's a Japanese card game, it's made in Japan, by Japan, for Japan, and we just are lucky enough to get it.
So at least so I guess I have 2 points that I usually use to counter the like it's too soon argument. One being that um the sooner we start, the sooner we start, acknowledge or start like accounting for it as far as design is concerned, if ever. I guess, technically there's, the argument can be made that they never consider mulligans or never consider sideboards when printing cards or when designing cards. But hopefully if they were to, fully implement it in presumably 50% of the like card game like to my knowledge there's the like the JP slash like Asian like competitive scene, and then there's the English scene, and that's it. Like the rest of the world is English if it's not Japanese, following the Japanese format. So
Well, Chinese is getting their own fork, but that's the Chinese doing the
okay,
Chinese thing.
okay, so small, yeah, but like so it presumably maybe not 50% numerically, like percentage wise, but um sizable enough to potentially consider at least someone to push back like, hey, that card would be really crappy if you print because of sideboards. That card would be really crappy to print because, it these other decks are really flexible. The earlier that we implement, sideboards and like cement sideboards, the more likely that is to actually happen, and less likely it's to like, I guess, permanently be ignored. And secondly, the um uh the sooner a sideboard is implemented, like, because I feel like it's almost like a revolving door argument somewhat. Like, so right now it's too early, but at some point in the potential like theoretical future, we're gonna hit a point where people are like, oh no, it's far too late to include a sideboard. Like that should have been done earlier. You know what I mean? Like people are just gonna switch sides of the fence without ever crossing the actual potential middle ground of maybe now is a good time to include sideboards. You know what I mean?
Right, and I think like they're still trying to test that, and I think internally, at least on the English side, they're having those discussions. The only unfortunate thing is the English side isn't the side that's making cards, and they're not like designing sets, because that's why we get the awkwardness of pre-releases and sealed, where it's like they just made rules to try to make what they have work, and it barely works as is and is just an awkward and clunky mess. And I feel like if that type of a change needs to happen, it needs to happen on the Japanese side, and I don't see the Japanese side changing or caving because of the way we want to play the game.
Imagine playing sealed Digimon. Yes, I can't relate to that. I've actually never played a true blue pre-release sealed, only because my local store kind of immediately decided that was stupid and just went with like a constructed prior format event because of previous issues with people basically building quote unquote pre-construct. Oh, I just happened to open, a full playset of Savior and a full playset of Jesmon in my BT6 pre-release. Like to prevent that, we don't do that because it was happening with Yu-Gi-Oh and I think Dragon Ball Super and stuff like that in previous card games. So they just kind of don't do that for any card game anymore. But that's me. So um, moving forward with the second half of this, this player's second point. Um, Hearing Mulligan for the first time was awesome, but I was very scared on not having to pay a cost for the Mulligan. In Magic, you can Mulligan by drawing a new hand, but by sending one card back down. Also known as the London Mulligan, very easy. If anyone really cares about like card game stuff, look up like the different mulligans that Magic has had. I know there's uh, I don't know what the hell the original one was called, but there's currently they use a London mulligan, and Commander uses a free mulligan, one free mulligan. But however, the Digimon mulligan is pretty. It also does solve the problem. I'm sorry, I'm cutting away from this person's writing again, but like, because I remember thinking, man, I really do want a mulligan, but it really is hard to answer the question of how do you implement a mulligan with security? Do you have to like reshuffle it in? Because as much as I try my best, I have like dehumidifier packets and everything. I can sometimes tell the difference between like a foil and a non-foil from the sleeve back. If I know I have certain cards in security, am I more likely to want a mulligan? But it kind of solves that um, problem as far as like the current Digifest mulligan's concerned, where you just leave your security, you look at your hand, and then you just bot deck and draw five. It's very minimally interruptive, which is probably the best portion of it and why it's so positively received. Is that just the idea that it's oh, I this hand's really bad. I probably can't play the game if I start with this hand. Put it to bottom, draw five, continue as normal.
I think part of it is like the design of that mulligan was made for speed. So if you actually look at a lot of like the Digimon design, a lot of it is based around just speed of play. So the reason why we have look at the top X cards and not just direct searchers is because searching your deck, shuffling your deck takes more time than just pulling cards off the top and shoving it to the bottom. So they're just trying to speed up the processes while still trying to make things engaging and interesting. And this mulligan accomplishes that because you have a very heavy decision on if I don't see these cards, like if these cards in my hand are that bad, but I need to see some of them, like do I decide to keep just because I want to try to see the cards I need to start off the top because I'm going to have a hard time finding those parts and pieces again? Or do I take that risk and just throw them all to the bottom and then just try to draw a new hand hoping it's better? So it's all designed around speed and accessibility, um, to try to help make for a more quick, cohesive experience.
Um, yeah, that's I guess the best portion of it is that it's so minimally disruptive. Um, but I guess something I was thinking while you were talking, basically, like the idea that we don't have any tutors, which is, I guess, the magic term for like look for X card like throughout your whole deck. We don't have any tutors at all. Thankfully, I guess but I think it's because, and I know I've tried to imagine like hybrid, like a mana system for Digimon if it were to ever include one, like complete thought experiment types of things, and but the biggest problem is that like the memory system, everything is inherently equivalently costed, even if it's not. Like, you know, a Gaia Force is 8. Hard playing a level 5 is also, sometimes 8. Like it's the same 8. There's only one kind of memory. There's no, color complications to be involved at all. And that's the problem. You can't just print tutors because, oh, you just make them more expensive. But who cares if things are more expensive if you get exactly what you want? In Magic, you have to like build up to that cost. In Digimon, you start out with it, flat out.
Yeah, and I think like just calling um the diggers that we have like tutors are is kind of a disservice because that's not what they are. They are digging. You are digging through your deck to find those cards. They're not searching. Like you are doing the act of searching, but they
Hmm.
are in my eyes diggers.
Yeah, it's
That's why in a lot of my videos I always say the deck's dedicated digger because
hmm
that's you're digging for it.
yeah. Dex like I see. Like they have like so many different nuanced different names for specific things, but like um, I believe the specific word, your terminology, I think is scry. We're scrying. One sec.
Uh yeah.
Scry is a keyword that allows you to
Scrying you
look at
get
a
to
certain
rearrange
look
and
at
put
yeah.
on the top or bottom.
Yeah, so
Uh
we just don't get a choice in that, but it is mostly most akin to scry from Magic.
yeah.
So we don't have any tutors though. We like that
Yeah,
kind
we
of
ain't Yu-Gi-Oh.
that
We
fun.
ain't Yu-Gi-Oh.
We ain't Yu-Gi-Oh and we're not Magic though. Like,
We're Digimon.
search your deck for, a Jessmon. That'd be a very different Huckmon card. Would kind of change the game quite a bit.
Oh my
Um,
god, that would be so broken.
I mean, you'd have to make it cost more, is what I'm saying too, because like usually tutors are prohibitively costed. So if you had a Huckmon that was like on play 5, take a Jessmon. Like it only gets Jessmon and it costs 5. Like maybe
I think
that's
it's such
kind.
cheap.
I said that's what I mean. Like but now you're getting ridiculous here. Like who's hard playing a rookie for 6, even if it gets them exactly what they want every time.
I think if you have a memory fixing tamer and you start your turn at 3 and they have a memory fixing tamer, you're paying that 6 every time.
Which is why we don't have them, and I'm glad we don't. But moving back to the text of the post, um, the Digimon Mulligan is pretty neat, namely that you are only allowed to mulligan once. That is a huge difference to Magic, and something that I didn't consider initially. If you throw away a mediocre hand in Magic and get a terrible hand, you can just mulligan again. Thus, unfair strategies have a decent advantage in Magic in some formats. However, taking away the option to mulligan multiple times really changes the evaluation of your hand. You have to keep medium hands in Digimon, as the chances to have a worse hand after the mulligan is just too high, which I 100% agree with. And it's something that I really, once I saw the DigiFest mulligan announced and played with it, I was like, this is perfect because the amount of times where I have like the amount of times I've wanted a mulligan usually also include hands that if I bot deck these 5 cards, I probably also potentially lose anyway. Or like, like there are very few hands that I want to use a Digimon mulligan, but there are way more hands where I would take a magic mulligan in which I had multiple times, okay, I'll just put my 5 back and shuffle and draw 4 new ones because I could potentially get some of the ones I just put back.
And now, like, expanding upon like the decision making is also kind of the fun aspect of it because, like, if you're a Jesmon player, you have one Savior Huckmon as of BT8. So if you see your one Savior Huckmon and you have a really bad opening hand, do you decide to pitch it because you found your one good card, or do you decide to keep it and try to fight through it despite the fact that the hand is subpar? Like, these are really interesting decisions, and as the game further grows and expands, and we get more bans and limitations eventually, whenever they decide to show up, it kind of just adds more weight to that decision.
Hmm. Um, where was I? I originally thought that decks such as Jesmon would be way too powerful with a mulligan, but it's just not true. Jesmon benefits more from the mulligan more so than other decks, but it is a marginal advantage, and having seen the results of the Digifests, Jesmon really didn't do anything there. In addition, okay, that's basically the start of another point, but like, yeah, I know Jesmon was 100% the deck, like, especially at locals when we immediately implemented the mulligan, everyone's like, "Oh, I hope you want Jesmon to win," and then like I come back, 2 weeks later, and I'm like, "Where's all the Jesmon?" And they're like, "Oh, it's not good." I'm like, "Really? I like you complained about it for an hour 2 weeks ago. Come on."
I think that's just people's initial like overreactions because we brand the numbers and it's just like Jesmon does get a little bit better from it, but like it's still going to perform mostly the same. Like it's like what 5% or like maybe at most 10% of an improvement.
Hmm.
But even then, like now with the limitation about to be hit on Savior, it makes it well. The deck changes obviously, but it makes the mulligan more of an interesting choice rather than a default choice.
Hmm. And like I said, I think like if anything, it's potentially like a negative like point against mulligans is that why include them at all if they're so minimally impactful? But I think that's the best change is no change almost, you know, while still changing something because the option's there. Now, if I ever do find there's a hand where like because there have been times, and at least especially at the local level, it 100% has happened where I've drawn 5 cards and I was like, how does your hand look? And my opponent's like, oh, it looks okay. And I'm like, I'm not even gonna play this game. Like, I'm wrong for that maybe, but I'm already a game down. I don't win with this. you know, I just lost a hand. I just lost when I had a way better hand. Maybe like too many missing pieces. I guess like I know I'm terrible at shuffling sometimes, and I'll just open 4 tamers and 2 level 6s and just kind of lose.
I mean, that's the whole point of the mulligan, and like you said, it's minimally intrusive. Like, it's there just as a safety net, and it's not like game warping or game ruining, where I do think that sideboards, the way they're implemented currently, based on our card pool, is a little bit more game warping because we have to fundamentally change how we build decks and how we evaluate cards. Mulligans don't really do that. It is minimally intrusive, like you said.
So I guess that's generally the gist. Like this person has one more point about how um because even though Jesmon gets more consistent, they are one of the few decks that can brick at multiple stages of the game because they're trying to build such a specific stack. Like they can go 3-4 and then not find Savior and then never play their Jesmon, or go 3 and then never see a starter deck Greymon and really not want to have to throw a Bow Huckmon down and potentially lose for that. Like they can basically brick throughout the game, or like you randomly start drawing a bunch of Sistermon you can't do anything with. So each deck has its positives and negatives, but um,
I think that's just the problem with like egg to six decks as a whole. It's like they obviously have one intended stack and then everything else is just kind of subpar to that one stack. And like that's just inherently too slow, especially with the way hybrids played and changed the game because it's like, oh, I just throw down any tamer and now it doesn't matter what that tamer is, I could digivolve on top of it. Obviously, you want it to be the intended tamer, but you're still getting some value just because of the ease of accessibility on how hybrids want to play. And the amount of options that they have to play their cards is astonishing compared to Egg to 6 decks, where it's just one dimensional, digivolve up the stack, hope you get the perfect stack, and then call it a day.
Yeah, that's one of the things too. Like I I really changed, or at least I have changed quite a bit how I've valued cards in the context of a game. Like I know if I see multiple level sixes, I usually have to value them not necessarily in the which of these would be better for me right now, but if I only had one of these, which would be better? Because a lot of times, especially in the hybrid meta, when I play stack decks, I usually only get one level 6 a game, sometimes two. Um, and just with kind of the speed of the game and how like comparatively slow stack decks are at going up the chain, and I guess the inherent nature of the fact that I need a breeding area on the side and I can't just, produce Digimon from tamers the same way that hybrid decks do. Um, that like I really do value it exactly in that context, I guess. Like, okay, when I'm putting this level 5 down, is it because like does it how much is this inheritable going to matter? How much is this cost going to matter? And is it potentially worth making a slightly different decision or a slightly less efficient decision in this moment, knowing that if I play this if I play the Volkdramon now as an example, like I then will never get a Jesmon that has a savior because by the time I see the savior and then make another stack, the game is over.
Yes, and I can't tell you how many times just playing casually, with a wide variety of decks where it's like, wow, I literally wish I had this inheritable instead of the one I played, and then I'd literally draw into the one that I wanted the following turn. I'm just like, wow, this stack is really awkward. It's super clunky. This doesn't do anything because like sometimes you do just have to build unoptimal stacks just to be able to progress your game state to be able to get to your mega. And I feel like just planning for the god stack is just a pipe dream. Like it will very rarely work out unless your deck is that consistent and that on point where a lot of your pieces are doing very similar things. So like it just is a more awkward result to just the speed of the game and how egg to six decks work versus some other decks.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can say that like I've had times where I'll have like two different level 4s in my hand and I'll be like, I don't know which one of these inheritables I care more about. Uh, and then I play it and then I'm immediately proven wrong the following turn. Like I guess with Diabormon specifically when I've been playing it, it's like, do I want the rush or do I want the memory gain? And it's like, well, if I'm playing against blue hybrid, I never get the memory gain, so I'll play the rush. And then, or if they don't have the floodgate out, I'll digivolve into the memory gain one, and then the following turn they play the floodgate. I was like, well, this inheritable effectively does nothing, so I have no way to remove that card.
But yeah, like it's definitely an interesting choice on just how mulligans influence the game on a more micro level, where it is just a more informed decision about the card evaluation and analysis in your opening hand versus what you could possibly draw into.
I do think that with the rise of more stack-based decks, I guess returning like not exclusive hybrid decks dominating the meta in as of like BT8, um, people will at least soften more on the idea of the mulligan and be thankful that it's there because I think the addition of the mulligan should hopefully like allow the stack decks to have the higher ceiling and benefit from the higher ceiling more because the hybrid decks will always have that higher or like I guess performance floor, not skill floor, like where you're not. you don't need specific tamers as much as you said. Like as long as you have some amount of hybrid, some amount of tamers, and a way to start, cycling resources and chipping at your opponent. Um, it doesn't matter like specifically which cards you see, as opposed to a stack deck where you're like, okay, I reveal, I pick up my hand and I've got 1/3, 2/4s, a 5 and an option, or a 5 and a tamer. It's like I don't have a level 6 here, but I can go up the stack. I can like, are these cards the ones I want to progress my game plan, or are these my filler off 5 and 4? Like, is this just my, I mean, not that people are even playing them anymore, as we mentioned previously, but like, is this just my one cost blocker level 4, or is this like a inline archetype specific level 4 that's going to really do something for me?
Yeah, and I've seen just a lot of posts, just people like this is more geared towards Jessamon specifically, but like people sometimes just don't know how to find or evaluate those substitutions where it's just like, oh, without Savior, what am I gonna do? Like they're so keyed and hyper focused on the God stack, the dream, and they're not like bothering to look past at that God stack or dream at the reality of the situation where it's like, well, sometimes you don't see a Jessamon in a game, or sometimes you don't see a Savior in a game. So, what do those games look like? What cards are you then going to use to try to adapt with? So, and they don't have an answer for that, and they're always asking that same question because they don't know how to evaluate past the God or the Dream Stack. And that's just not necessarily going to happen all of the time. And even with a mulligan, that's still not going to happen all of the time.
I mean, like, at least in the case of Jesmon specifically, the answer is just kind of Chimeramon. Like, I guess to really like dig into that for a second. Um, like
Well,
Chimeramon
Chimeramon still needs to have some other level 5 to help support it. It's like
in your
the reason
trash.
why, I mean, yeah, but like you want another level 5 to be paired up with Chimeramon and the Savior. So like
Yeah,
people are struggling finding that one other card that they want because they don't know what their options are. And they never had to think about what their options are because they all just looked at Japanese lists and saw everyone was just running 4 Saviors and calling it a day, or Savior Chimera, not realizing that the English format is different.
I mean, it's probably just Voltramon, right? Like, um, but
I
the
mean,
idea that
Voltron's the easiest
Chimeramon
one,
just
yeah.
kind of like adopts, because you're trading a level 5 inheritable for a level 5 inheritable. Um, the difference being that it'll cost 4 if you're digivolving. Like, I
Oh, you're
guess
never digivolving with Chimeramon. You're
it is
always
if it's your only
doing
level 5.
Digivolution.
Again, like,
I mean,
no,
if
you're not,
it's your only level 5, yes. Um, but you like the way the deck works in BT8, at least from my experience, is like you're using Chimeramon more of a stopping point because he could be a very aggressive level 5 in his own right. So like Chimeramon's almost your pseudo mega. Um, and like if you don't see your Jessamon, fine, you're not crying because Chimeramon can still do a lot of work based on what your other level 5s are. So like even though Savior is still the best level 5, like you still need to have something to pair up with the Chimeramon.
you could run
Ultramon's just the easiest one because it's just a generic security tech plus. But
or
like I just made a
Growlmon.
video about the new Jessamon covering a whole bunch of different options, and there's still just a lot of different level 5s that Red can use that are really good.
Yeah. So, yeah, you're I guess the whole point of Chimeramon is you're just literally exchanging its inheritable for a level 5 from your trash. You'd probably then have to run some amount of like analog youth to throw something in your trash.
You
Um,
don't necessarily have to. Like just you like you're not trying to fill up your trash with Jessamon. It's just one of those things where it's like, oh, it just happens. Um, like even if it's a level 4 inheritable, like that's still just very, very valuable. It's like, oh, my starter deck Greymon's in my trash because you killed my stack or something. Cool. It actually wants you to be really aggressive with Bauhuck. So like Bauhuck is a fantastic card to just start swinging with as a level 4 because he's 6,000 DP, he's in the Huckmon line, so that way you could put him in your trash and then use him for various different cards later. So it's a really interesting build, and I think like Jesmon is a very strong deck in BT8 because of the different ways you could use your cards now.
More importantly, why are you playing Jesmon and BT8 when Black War Greymon exists? That deck fucks.
I mean, because you already invested in Jesmon and you're just looking to upgrade and you don't really feel like spending a whole lot.
That's true.
But regardless, it's just very interesting on how these different style of decks take to these different sets of rules because I think like hybrids using sideboards gives them more of an advantage because they have more flexibility on what they can do and the cards that they can use versus traditional egg to six decks or something with a hard baked in engine that takes up the majority of the deck.
I think like a slight aside slash bigger picture refocusing a little bit. I think hybrids are the symptom, not the illness. And I think because we kind of alluded to it previously, we just didn't really like narrow in and talk about it specifically. The the decks that have more inherent flexibility, decks that are more color based or generic strategy based that aren't restricted to a specific archetype set of like Digivolution line or something or a bunch of cards, very specific cards interacting with each other. Those are the decks that are performing better in our game in general. Traditionally, like like Jesmon never really saw super success because it requires a bunch of very specific pieces all working in tandem, whereas something like Lord Nightmon doesn't really require that many pieces. The full Lord Nightmon package truly is 8 cards.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And I think like we've seen this type of example before with like why Commandramon and D Brigades was so popular because it was just half of its own deck, and then you just run whatever other half you feel like you want to run, and then it just magically works because it's just you're using one as the low end and the other as the top end.
I just think that like as far as our game's concerned, because we do have so few options already, like you mentioned, like the smaller card pool, the newer card game, the cards that do get to use the full breadth of its toolkit, and how they really try to make like blue source removal a thing for so long that finally we got to narrow in and lock into a not very specific blue source removal deck that also happens to be super aggressive, super cheap, and dodges a ton of removal.
Yeah, I also think that's just like part of the consequence of like having higher usability on our cards. So like looking ahead but not too far ahead, we see that like in BT8 we have these armor evolutions. So they have their intended rookie that they're supposed to digivolve off of, but they also can digivolve off of the other color, and now you have different ways to be able to use these types of cards. We see this also in BT9 where they have the X antibody mechanic where it digivolves on top of another Digimon of that same level with a specific name. So it's just like, oh, now my level 4 Greymon, if I'm bricking, I could digivolve Greymon into potentially Greymon to try to help unbrick. And like that's kind of what they were leaning towards initially was just the higher usability allows your deck to flow more smoothly.
I know you
And
mentioned this, like I guess in the like in previous conversations, not necessarily on the podcast yet, but like and maybe it just facilitates like a larger discussion itself, but um the idea of like being able like the idea of multicolored Digimon period potentially allowing you to like run like not necessarily I guess in the way that the hybrids work where they're running like they don't need rookies and eggs therefore they run off colored rookies and eggs, but like the ability to just run like all yellow rookies, but as long as all of your level 4s can digivolve off of yellow you can just pivot to other colors halfway through the evolution cycle and then just become your top end is like purple but your whole base is yellow, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so that's my I'm not necessarily coining. I'm labeling it my terms of transitions. So like two color Digimon scare the ever living crap out of me because it could break the game very wide open very easily if not done correctly. And these transitional stages, level fours and fives, are the scariest places that they could put those because your threes and sixes will not matter what color they are because you like you just pointed out, you could use those transitions to pivot in any way, shape, or form. And if you're running enough like consistency in the pivots, you could basically just ignore colors entirely, and that terrifies me because that's a huge draw aspect to like what Digimon is as a whole. And right now, a lot of those like multicolor decks using these two color Digimon are more thematic, thankfully. Um, and they're not necessarily something that's just like, oh, this deck goes, here's all yellow level threes into something that can digivolve off of it into one color to digivolve to something into another color to end on a completely separate color on your top end. Like they've all been more cohesive on that as of right now. But not saying that that won't happen in the future. It's just that prospect terrifies me because they could do it very wrong very easily.
The only thing that concerns me, like at least initially, from the concept of like multicolored Digimon, which again, super on board with the adoption of multicolor, especially just because, barring from the most successful card game in history, Magic the Gathering, their edition and their one of their strongest sets ever that they've returned to Ravnica is the Guilds of Ravnica and their two color combinations. They really took the idea that like a color can be more than a color, and it could be like a combination of colors can also be a color and have its own unique identity and purpose and thematic like licensing basically. And it's something Digimon I could see doing a lot with, especially if you like at least as they've done with BT8 with the ideas of like there's the Vmon armor evolutions, or there's the Terriermon armor evolutions. Is it just Rapidmon? Um,
It's just Rapidmon.
or the Armadillomon armor evolution. Like it's the different like transitions for the various level threes and their different armor evolutions. But like um obviously Vmon getting the most of them, being the favorite. Um, but the idea that you could really take like something and make it its own color almost by as a combination of colors. The problem with it, I guess, long tangents, is that it makes options very easy to cast, unfortunately, because you cannot make like as I mentioned way back when I was talking just about like how everything kind of costs the same, is that like you by adding two colors without adding an inherent cost to them, they're just kind of better because you get twice as much value out of them, like as far as like colors it lets you play. We're already seeing from the hybrid meta how easy it is if you just swap your rookies and your eggs to just completely splash in, a set of option cards that completely change like yellow hybrids is a really bad deck, pure yellow hybrids, but as soon as you include purple option cards, wow, it's actually functional.
Yeah, it gets a lot better, especially at like the type of gameplay it wants to attain. And like these two color Digimon just and even two color tamers just kind of ignore a lot of that downside. So it's like you get Davis and Ken as like a really good example where it's just like in the starter deck you get a two color option that's supposed to be played because you're playing these two color Digimon because you have to meet both requirements on the field. Well, now here's a tamer that just automatically does both of it. Boom, easy, done. Now I can run this option card without even having to think about it. And like that could be a very scary thing, especially with sideboards, because now you could almost Swiss Army knife into various different directions depending on how the game actually is growing and evolving with these two color Digimon. Um, because now the good side is you could actually run completely different packages in some packages to shore up some of your deck's weaknesses a little bit better because of the two color aspect of it. but at the same time, you're sacrificing the design space to allow that to even exist to begin with, because now it's like, oh, what is there was a more tangible consequence to me running um, purple eggs versus yellow eggs and yellow hybrids, just for the consistency, or red eggs versus green eggs in green hybrids as another example. There was a tangible difference on how the decks want to play, and now you're basically foregoing that for even greater levels of consistency.
Yeah, I think the only I guess the thing that would make sense potentially to like kind of like make the issue a little bit more palpable is I'm just sitting here looking at BTA cards is like so like the BTA Cherubimon is an easy example. It is a yellow card that can come off of yellow or purple. But so at the end of its cycle, um, if it were just treated as a pure yellow card, you are only what is your top end, whatever that may be, and then making the actual stages evoable off of multiple colors potentially, but still one color. It would just at least make those color requirements a little harder to meet. Because like you said, with like the dual tamer as an example, I don't really think it's a thing, but I know someone's going to really try as we start to include more powerful option cards with the dual color requirements. And I guess, small side note for anyone that doesn't know, dual color option cards do require both colors to be present to cast them. Um, but nobody cares if it comes from security. So you could just run some really disgusting dual color security control. Again, I really don't think it's a thing, but I really would rather not hit Dark Gaia Force as opposed to regular Gaia Force.
I would definitely agree. Like, just security as a whole is already a really I don't want to say broken, but it's a really powerful mechanic to be playing around with. And like I think like the attempt on what a lot of these two color Digimon are doing is basically they're trying to just ignore colors to be able to form its own unique deck. So looking at the Black War Greymon, it's just like you have Greymon as a perfect example where it's like this can digivolve off of black or red, and it's a black based Digimon as a level 4. So like it incentivizes you to run those types of cards because that's just how you could evo naturally into your higher stages, and then you get the transitional Digimon, which can evo again off of black or red, so that way you have higher usability on your cards, and it doesn't necessarily matter what color they are. So it's really interesting to see what they're trying to do with these two color Digimon and how they're trying to implement them into the game in a more meaningful way without destroying the game at the same time.
I know my favorite portion of dual colored, I guess, period, like from Magic or for Digimon, looking at BT8, um, like the marriage of the two colors and how they're adapting and adopting like both aspects, and you can literally almost read like line by line on these cards, like the color theory behind them. And I love color theory. I really think if Digimon like I know we're kind of moving more towards an archetypical play line, I guess kind of more like Yu-Gi-Oh a little bit, where like you need to run the black red Agumon, the black red Greymon, the black red Metal Greymon, the black war Greymon. Otherwise, the deck just is a worse version of itself. Um, the idea that you could move like into more color-based decks, less archetypical, more general, but maybe our card pool is a little too small for that too sometimes. Um, but like the idea of, I guess like the dual tamer specifically, Davis and Ken, like um, you know, if you have a blue Digimon in play, gain one memory. If you have a green Digimon, gain one memory. Never mind. That was a terrible example. I'm awful at this. Fucking switch back to the Black War Greymon. If there's a red card, you can choose an opponent's Digimon. If there's a black card, you can choose a Tamer. Delete any number of chosen cards whose total play cost adds up to 6 or less. So, I guess this is saying black is Tamer hate as of this set, but red is destroying Digimon, always has been a thing. black is destroying tamers, and if you have both, you can do some combination of the two.
And the fact that the cards also like sometimes these abilities will count for basically themselves because Black War Greymon is a black and a red Digimon, meeting both requirements. Um, kind of also makes it a little bit easier to use their own abilities. But the interesting thing that I haven't really seen a whole lot of people talk of is like looking at the colors of Digimon, they really seem, as of right now, to be focused on very specific two color pairings.
Hmm.
So black red, uh, yellow, purple, and blue green. So those are the three color combinations that they really want to support, and they have just a little bit of sprinkles for some of the other combinations, but those are the more supported ones as of this time.
Yeah. I mean, like, so something also, like, as comparison, overarching comparisons between card games, um, Digimon sets are fairly small compared to Magic sets, and we get way more of them. Like, we're in year one of, officially past year one a little while ago. I know I started playing with 1.5, which I think came out like March. So
That came out in March, and then 1.0 came out like January, February.
I never, like, for the first like 6 months of the card game, I didn't see a single sealed package of 1.0. So as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't exist. But um, yeah, 1.5 came out and we could actually get product. Um, and but like we've gotten now 1, 1.5, 4, 5, 6, EX7. So 7 sets still. Um, in That's not right. How did I count that? 1, 1.5, 4, 5, 6, EX7. No, no, that's
The
7.
EX, yeah,
So,
the EX is
um,
acting in.
7 sets in a year. That's almost literally twice as much as Magic gets, if not slightly more than twice as much. So, but theirs have more cards. Like, so BT8's has 112 cards. Let me just do a quick Google. MTG, uh, New
A
Capenna,
usual Magic set has like almost
3.
230, 250 cards. Well, yeah,
Hmm.
Digimon usually has 100 and like 10, 115.
So they're smaller, but um, there's also different kinds of cards in Magic, and they have to like match every color equally. Digimon also ignores that quite a bit. um,
Yeah, like Digimon set design, the more I think about it, it literally feels like they just are sitting on a ginormous pool of cards and they're just like, oh, we'll just stick this one here. Like, that's literally what it feels like to me. And I say this as a person who has made sets for a trading card game before. uh, Usually you want to have some more cohesiveness when it comes to your card designs. Granted, you will just sit on a pool of designs as a whole, um, just because most of the time those will end up being used for promos, or if you need to put something in to just try to help fill out the set, then that's where those types of cards come from. But it really does feel just like a giant mishmash of cards a lot of the time. And it's kind of funny. Like they'll just have a core central theme, build upon that, as the selling point of the set, and then just have random cards thrown out.
well, so I'm I'm thinking and I'm backtracking a little bit here because not all colors are created equal. I guess almost literally, because if we go back to like the initial BT1, only included 3 colors, right? It only included what, like
BT1 was 4 colors
four
because
colors.
black and purple were not introduced until BT2 in Japan,
Okay. So
which is
just
really weird, like thinking about it, because it's like they would have known to that those two colors were coming, so why didn't they include them in BT1? Like
they
I don't,
probably
I
just
just I
couldn't
don't
think of
get it.
enough literal like enough cards to print for them because they're like the quote unquote evil colors, and there are less villains than there are like you have like what 6 Digidestin, 7 Digidestin, so you have way more to work with there as far as like Digimon and their respective Digimon lines. They could have just made
Well,
each of them the face of a color too.
Well, the weird thing is like when 1.0 and or not 1.0, when BT1 and BT2 were rolling around, like BT2 was kind of a really high note because it introduced the new color, but like those new colors had significantly less cards to play with than the other colors because they didn't have the starter deck and they were one set behind in terms of like the amount of support that they got. So it was just kind of putting those colors in a really awkward position. And I still don't even know why that if they knew those colors were coming, why they just didn't do it initially.
Yeah. I mean, probably demands and potentially maybe like obviously like I think Bandai's even come out and said they didn't expect it to be this popular because card games are a dime a dozen nowadays. Um,
Especially in Japan.
but like the like I'm literally looking at cards here and it feels like red and blue are just like on a different wavelength than everybody else almost. Because
No, they are like the cool thing is the colors are very, very different while being very similar at the same time. Like each of them has their own flavor, is probably the best way I could describe it. Like
mm-hmm,
there's very um they do have color identities. Like they understand what yellow does versus what green does versus what red does. But like at the same time, they sometimes just need to make functionally same cards between them just because they're trying to actually support the idea of the colors. So
yeah,
it's definitely really interesting to see like which colors are getting more support, and it kind of goes all the way back to like looking at our top records. Um, Blue and yellow are the two most competitive colors in the game because they have the widest net of tools that they have access to.
and they have not as not as narrow a like design space. Like I know you mentioned like red's problem is that they're kind of just meant to be like the one shot, one stack color, and they just kind of aren't. Or if they either are or they aren't, and when they're not, they lose. And it's kind of harder to balance that because if you make it too strong, then that's all that people play.
Exactly. And like that's kind of the balancing act that they kind of are like, I don't want to say losing, but they need to like figure out is just what the card game can, should, and does allow in terms of like what is going to be fun and interesting.
Yeah, cause like I'm trying to think like what can you adopt from Magic without like either A blatantly stealing, but like also comparison of mechanics here. Like one of the things that red has in Magic is like it's like the direct damage color pretty much. And like a lot of red decks are just literally they're called burn decks and their goal is just to deal damage to you via spell cards or card effects and that's just kind of not a like transferable mechanic at all because you can't have a card that just says when digivolving destroy the top card of your opponent's security. Like that's fucked.
Yeah, like that's why Digimon in the Reddit post says like Digimon is a very special game because it is a very different game than a lot of the others that we've played, and that's what makes it really interesting and fun is to see like where this is going because it is a completely different beast on the mechanics that it's playing around with while being very similar to other card games for more familiarity's sake, and because like some of those mechanics are just, you know, universal mechanics. It's like what can you do different other than drawing a card? It's like there's no other way of putting a drawing a card as an effect. Same thing with like beating over Digimon, dealing damage. Like we've seen that effect so many times in so many other card games. Losing a fight but still killing the opponent's Digimon. Like there's some universal mechanics that just work, but there's some mechanics that are just unique to Digimon based on how it's designed.
Yeah. Um yeah, just like the idea that um you can't directly transfer everything and you need to come up with like creative solutions to like like the fact that DP is both an attack and a health metric like is hard to balance sometimes because you know like green in Magic is traditionally sometimes like very healthy things but they're maybe more expensive but like if you just make shit for green and Digimon more expensive for being stronger DP wise, it's somewhat slower because and you don't have that direct combat interaction in it's entirely like defender oriented or reactionary oriented. Like your opponent declares an attack and I could block with anything. Everything has blocker technically, and therefore I can choose not to block with something. Like I would never block with my um Sakuyamon, but it also means I could attack with it and it would never get killed on the following turn. Also, there's no security, so there's no risk of it dying ever.
Yeah, and I think like Digimon is past that analysis paralysis on just wide fields and attacking that some other card games kind of suffer where it's just like, oh, if I attack, I'm putting my thing at risk of being stopped. And that's like the big thing on like when wide boards get a little bit too hard to manage, it just makes the math and the reason for combat bog way down. Digimon simplifies and streamlines that type of experience
So
where
I
it's just like, oh, they just don't have blocker innately, so you're free to swing. They have to have the ability to stop them, which is both a good thing and a bad thing depending on the deck and how it's going to be implemented. So it's just a very interesting game.
I know we kind of went off on a little like BT8 color theory tangent. Um, I will definitely return to this when BT8's actually closer to coming out. I know we have a whole um episode planned where we're just gonna discuss the BT8, the dual colors, and what it really adds to the card game as a whole, and in a more thorough process than what we've added here.
This was just kind of it was more ad-libbed, just because the discussion was on like how does sideboards and mulligans implement the game, and then taking a look at the future to seeing like, oh, now that two colors are coming in, what does that mean for sideboards and mulligans? Is this properly balanced? Should this be implemented? That was kind of like the whole grand scheme of things.
Yeah, and um, mostly hedging on Zenitsu's points of like how if um, since we are basically kind of assuming mulligans are gonna stay, if you have more flexible Digimon in the forms of like dual colored options, uh, options amongst Digimon still, like not the option cards, but like dual colored Digimon, are there decks that are the mulligans going to make them almost too consistent with the draw power we've seen? Um, but at least I'm optimistic. I usually am when it comes to these things.
Yeah, like I'm not against sideboards. I think mulligans are gonna be a here to stay kind of a thing because like even if decks get more consistent, it's still just a safety net to just say, hey, it's just reducing the amount of non-games. Whether you use it or not doesn't matter. It's just there just to be there. Sideboards, on the other hand, that is a little bit more game influential, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, and I think two-color Digimon do have that potential to really bust things wide open in a sideboard scenario to really do some absolutely crazy things with, and that could be both a good thing and a bad thing. But as of right now, I'm standing like it just kind of feels like it's too early. The colors and cards aren't really fleshed out to support it equally, and that's kind of why certain colors and decks have been performing or overperforming, is because they just have better tools to use than other colors.
Yeah, I'm. I guess I'm similarly minded at this point. Like I said, that I want there to be a sideboard, and I really wish there was a world where we had uh, you know, a balanced team that understood or that designed cards for best of three with sideboard and mulligans, but I don't really think that's ever going to happen. And so because that's never going to happen, I don't want um, there to be sideboards to potentially be manipulated in the future. I know we've seen that like blue hybrids benefited slightly more than other decks from the addition of a sideboard, but they were probably going to be the best deck this format anyway after the bans and restriction announcement. Like they're just they really just have the widest berth of tools at the moment, really.
And that's really like what a sideboard is supposed to do, is just widen that net of tools. And obviously blue just has one of the widest nets next to yellow, but the way yellow hybrids works is a little bit more restrictive on their types of tools because they need support from purple in order to actually be like more competent. Otherwise, they do have to build their decks completely differently. And I don't necessarily know if a pure yellow with enough testing would be any better than a yellow purple. And even then, with sideboards, now you have access to purple cards you could think about siding into and out of on top of your yellow tools, but still, it's just a very wide net for that type of a deck to cast. And like it would have a easier time versus something like a Jessamon or a Machine Dramon, where right now their tools are more limited and there's not really much you're going to be siding other than just fixing specific numbers and maybe adding a specific tech card.
Yeah. So with that, I think we've talked enough. Um, I know we had another idea. I know I initially said the Cyborg Mulligan thing was going to be like an introduction, but I was just kind of kept the discussion organic and really move with it. So we'll probably have like a smaller side, if not next episode of the podcast, about more underrated decks of the format and how, even though those decks haven't necessarily performed, then they can see they still could see success and decks you should at least be interested in trying out and potentially upgrading for BT8. So look out for that in the future. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Zenitsu?
No, with that, I will see everyone later in the next episode, hopefully.
Goodbye.